Shalom, Chaverim, and welcome to another Heartfelt Haftarah. This week, we're going to be talking about Korach. Korach is the portion in the book of Numbers. And in Korach itself, we have the story of the rebellion of Korach, the leader of a group of Levites and Reubenites who object to the sweeping divine authority that has been given to Moses and Aaron. And so what ends up happening is what is called an ordeal, a confrontation in which God decides what will happen. Everybody has to make an offering on the altar, and then God will judge between them. And as it turns out, the earth opens up and Korach gets swallowed. If only our presidential elections were as decisive as that, but they're not. And actually, I'm not sure I want divine intervention running us. But the theme of God running the people and governing them is an ongoing theme and comes up in our Haftarah portion. So let's start off with a little. Oh, here it is. Tent peg business, talking about the transition from the era of the judges or the Shoftim to the monarchy. So, if as you're familiar from what we've talked about earlier in the book of Judges, what's going on is the Israelites are in that fancy Greek word, a fictionia, basically a confederation of clans. And supposedly, every time one is threatened, all of them respond by sending militia and warriors and leaders, etc. And a shofet, or a judge, or a war chieftain arises to lead them, a charismatic figure, a sitting bull or a crazy horse who is able to lead the people into battle. The problem being that this early NATO doesn't work quite as well as it should. Oftentimes, tribes more remote from the threat do not come to the assistance of the tribes more immediately threatened. We see problems with this occur several times during the period of the judges. And so it's not the most efficient system for dealing with external threats. And that brings us to the book of Samuel. So let me tell you a little bit about Samuel, and then we'll go from there. So Samuel is such a fascinating figure. He's a transitional figure because he is clearly a shofet. He is a war leader in his own right. He is a charismatic figure. He is a Nazirite. He also fills other roles. So, for example, though supposedly in the book of Leviticus, only the descendants of Aaron are entitled to function as priests in the sanctuary. What we get a snapshot of in the early book of Samuel is that, in point of fact, Samuel, who is an Ephronite, is dedicated to the temple. He is a Nazirite himself, and he ends up being able to make sacrificial offerings. How is that possible? Well, apparently, the rule presented to us earlier in the Torah that only the descendants of Aaron can serve as priests actually might be a later rule that was then sort of introduced into an earlier narrative of the Torah. Apparently, during the time of the judges, judges could do sacrifices without being priests. So, a little bit of chronological confusion, anachronisms, retrojection. We're not sure exactly what's going on. But anyway, so Samuel is a judge. He's a priest, and he seems to be the first of what are classically considered to be the prophets. So he is in every way a transitional figure, but he's very interesting. Now, I always remind people the book of Samuel might lead you to think that Samuel wrote it, but Samuel is dead in the first 10 chapters. He only appears in the first 10 chapters and then he's dead. So everything else that happens in 1st and 2nd Samuel happens after his death. So I think probably the ancient tradition was more like naming a book after the first character mentioned in the book. And then if it proceeds beyond, so be it. So Samuel is not the author of Samuel. So now we know a little bit about this. So let's get to the Haftarah itself. I said there was a conflict in leadership. The role of God as leader of the people is part of the book of Korach, and this continues in the book of Samuel, though it continues in a much more naturalistic and realistic fashion, and that is this, that the Israelites have been fighting off external enemies now for some time. They've been relying on the Amphictyoni. They've been relying on the appearance of judges to help them fight this off. But it's a very ad hoc system. And at a certain point, if you're going to be threatened externally again and again, the logical move is centralization. Let's put someone in charge on a permanent basis to be able to defend the Israelite people. This, of course, in the Iron Age would be a king. This is a controversial move, right? Because God supposedly is the king of Israel, and the Amphictyoni is not totally failed, but it's not terribly efficient. So that sets up the conflict that we encounter in our Haftarah, because in it, Samuel is called upon to give the Israelites a king, and he is not happy about that. He objects. He talks about himself and how he has been successful to this point in managing the external threats that come to Israel. But the people are not satisfied. The people want a king. They want a centralized authority to mobilize. And the crisis that leads to this is a king named Nachash, the snake. I mean, that's a menacing name. It's like a biker name. It's like Snake Plissken from Escape from New York. Anyway, so the snake is threatening the northern tribes, and he's sieging towns on the eastern side of the Jordan, and it's becoming a problem. It's a remote location for a lot of the Israelite tribes, and so no doubt there were problems mobilizing people to march that far and fight. So anyway, people demand a king. God acquiesces, but Samuel is upset about it, and he makes a number of speeches telling the people that this is wrong, that you're committing an evil by doing this, but he has to eventually acquiesce. Then we have the complication that there seems to be as many as 3 different versions of how the kingship comes about. In one of them, Saul, the first king, a Benjaminite, acts proactively in a heroic way, like Hector or Cincinnatus. He suddenly hears about this crisis with Nachash, and he slaughters all of his oxen, and he sends the different parts to the 12 tribes and says, you'd better send your militia or you're going to end up like this oxen, right? Pretty serious message. And he is successful. And this, I think, provokes people to think, oh, he should be king. We get a couple of other accounts of how Saul is elected to be king of Israel, and it is sort of a kind of election, sort of, but it's something that also happens with David, in that the people have a voice, but we're told that somehow God is behind it all. And maybe that's splitting the difference. But in any case, Samuel is forced in real life to acquiesce to the desires of the people. And here we get an account of all that he has done so that he can get it out of his system that he feels rejected by them. And of course, God concludes by saying, they're not rejecting you. In a sense, they're rejecting me by wanting a king. But that's how we end up with an Israelite monarchy. Now, of course, we all think of the monarchy as involving David, but that's a different story. The first king of united Israel is Saul the Benjaminite. So now you can see a major historical transition happening in the ancient Israelites. Again, just like in Korach, it is the people questioning how God is governing them and whether there is a better way to do it. In the case of Korach in our Torah portion, God offers a definitive no to the innovators. On the other hand, in the book of Samuel, God acquiesces to the innovators and allows a king to be appointed. So, a major historical shift, and also evidence of a growing sense of the people at least having a voice in what happens to them. In the dream time of the wandering, God is totally in charge. But once we have settled on the land, we start to assert ourselves and insist that uh, things be addressed in a way that we feel comfortable with. So, an emerging quasi-democratic element appearing in ancient Israel. That is our Haftarah portion for this week. And I hope you find it interesting if you read it. It is, again, it's a kvetch by Samuel at the end of his life. But, sometimes we have to have certain transitions, even from admired and beloved figures. Talk to you next week.